Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the show. Statistics Canada says the annual pace of inflation climbed to a 30-year high in the month of December. Today, Statistics Canada reported that the annual pace of inflation climbed in December to 4.8%. How will the government approach the cost of living issue, and how should this report by Statistics Canada be addressed by the government? And what does the government plan to do about it? Let's answer these questions with Francesco Sorbara, who is the Liberal MP for the Ontario riding of Vaughan Woodbridge, Jaime Schmale, the Conservative MP for the Ontario riding of Haliburton Kawartha Lakes Brock, and Daniel Blakie, the NDP MP for the Manitoba riding of Elmwood Transcona, who's also that party's finance and employment critic. Francesco, I'll start out with you. The report that was released today, it showed a 4.8% inflation, as I mentioned, for the month of December. Your government and the finance minister and the prime minister earlier today said it's a result of supply chain shortages. The opposition, meaning the Conservatives, say that it's due to a couple of different reasons. One of them being the level of spending. What's your take on the issue specifically? The take where the prime minister and other members of your government have said that it's caused by supply chain shortages.
Well, thank you, White, and thank you for the invitation this evening. Look, this is inflation and the increase that we've seen in prices across Canada and the grocery stores that my family shops at and across the world. Obviously, they've been in unison. We've seen inflation rates go up in all economies, developing and developed, and that is. In today's report by Statistics Canada reference to the impact and indirect consequences of COVID-19 and the supply chain challenges that we've seen from COVID-19, also from pent-up demand that we've seen from COVID-19 and what's happened to that extent. And now what are we doing about it? Well, first off, we have to fix our supply chains, and those are being ironed out. There's a summit at the end of the month on that. We see in our ports increased capacity. And we also have to make life more affordable for Canadians, whether that's the increases in the Canada Child Benefit that are ongoing, whether that's putting in $10 daycare, whether that's increases that we promised on the Guaranteed Income Supplement in the budget, and that hopefully will be in the upcoming budget, our platform and upcoming budget. A number of measures that we've introduced to help Canadians with affordability. It's a challenge with the inflation. Yes, it is. It's not just a Canada or localized issue. It is worldwide. And we understand the concerns that Canadians have, and we're there to assist.
And Francesco, so I'll follow up with you on that, because obviously I'm sure, people watching and myself can appreciate the fact that, it is, an issue that is relevant and that is happening in many countries around the world. In the United States, the inflation rate is at 7%, which is the highest there that it's been since 1982. So specifically on that, though, when you look at, obviously it has an impact in terms of if it's high in other countries, it has an impact on what you import and export. If Canada lowers the inflation rate and other countries don't, it can still put pressure on some of our supply chains and stuff. So how are you going to, because even if you were to fix the problem in Canada, there would still be issues with it. So how can you work with some of our other allies and other countries to address it?
Well, excellent question, Wyatt, and thank you for that. I think the one thing that we can do is continue to make life more affordable for Canadians, whether it's $10 daycare, whether it's increases in the Guaranteed Income Supplement, whether it's raising the basic personal exemption amount, which we did and continues to rise. So the first $15,000 of what Canadians make is tax-free, is making sure Canadians have more money in their pockets to pay for goods and service. On the inflation rate itself, we also do see what are called base effects. So in prior years, because of COVID, there was some deflation in some areas. Now we're seeing a reflation in a lot of products and services. There is a lot of pent up demand. We have seen that. We have supported Canadians through the pandemic. We were there for them. We see 5.5 million Canadians collected the wage subsidy or help with the wage subsidy, the CERB. So there was a number of programs in place because literally overnight, our economy froze and we needed to be there for Canadians. So we know that was necessary. We also know now that we need to fix the supply chains globally. We need to do that. We know that an empty container coming over from Europe pre-pandemic was about $3,000. That same container, roughly, what I was told, was between now $10,000 to $15,000. And we need to iron out those issues so we can get the supply chain back and get those prices normalized again.
And Jamie, I'll go to you next. Obviously, the Liberals point out oftentimes what they've done. They say that they're moving forward with their $10 a day childcare plan, and that will make life more affordable. Is that enough in your view to combat inflation and the current cost of living crisis?
First of all, Wyatt, thank you very much for the opportunity to attend, and good to see my colleagues again. Happy New Year to you both. It's been a while, but always good to see your smiling faces. Look, first of all, the inflation crisis hitting Canada is a direct result of the printing presses being fired up by the Bank of Canada, and they've done that because the government itself started to make additional spending commitments over and above what was brought in by taxation. And when they put that out to the market for people to buy in terms of bonds, etc., there were very few buyers, and there wasn't enough. So the printing presses decided to you have more dollars chasing fewer goods. Now, the countries such as Singapore and Switzerland, which are dependent upon mostly imports for their way of life, their inflation rate is quite reasonable. But you look at Canada and the United States, for example, the United States, the big behemoth that fired up the printing presses as well, they're dealing with massive price increases on pretty much everything. We're looking at bare shelves wherever you go. The housing market is absolutely incredible right now in terms of pricing people out of the ability to buy a home. If you have a home, or a big one, for example, you're probably quite happy. But for those who are kind of in the working class, the lower income people as well, this is hurting them and phasing them out the most. So this crisis is made because the government started spending over and above what they're taking in. Now, we just saw the parliamentary watchdog, the budget watchdog for Parliament. I'll get the numbers right here. Since the start of the pandemic, the Liberal government has spent or is planned to spend $541.9 billion in new measures, almost 1/3 of which is not part of the COVID-19 response plan. And as we said before, we as the opposition supported those measures, such as the wage subsidy, CERB, and others that got people through that hump when they were told to lock down and stay safe. But what we didn't support is all the extra measures that were couched in the language of COVID, but had absolutely nothing to do with COVID. So when my friend talks about $10 a day daycare, this by and large will be deficit financed. And this is the whole problem. If you continue to run it on the credit card and you have to print cash because no one's buying your debt, this problem is not going away. You're going to price more people out of the market, and you're going to hurt more and more people, pushing them into poverty if you keep printing out this cash out of thin air and debauching the currency and the economy.
And Mr. Blakie, to bring you in, obviously your party had your caucus retreat today, but Mr. Poilievre, the Conservative finance critic, held a press conference just after the report was released, and then the Prime Minister was asked about it at his press conference as well. They both gave different answers as to why they thought it was caused, as has been quite frequent throughout this kind of disagreement. Obviously, just to kind of recap, the Conservatives are, saying it's a result of, spending more than the economy can handle. And then the government says it is a result of supply chain shortages. What side of that kind of disagreement does the NDP fall on?
Well, frankly, there's a little bit of truth in both claims. And I think when we talk about government spending, particularly as it relates to inflation, then you got to talk about what are you spending your money on. So when it comes to things like childcare, with all due respect to my friend Jaime, the fact of the matter is that childcare is an investment, and employers right now are talking about having trouble getting people to come and work. There's a lot of parents that are home that would like to be able to work, but either can't afford childcare or can't secure childcare. So having good quality childcare that parents can access and afford is a really important pillar of getting our economy working again. And so that's, while you do need money initially in order to get the ball rolling on that, there has been a lot of good research to show that in places where they have invested heavily in childcare, they've seen a lot of return both to their economy in terms of increased economic activity and higher household incomes, but also government revenue, because people who are going to work are paying taxes on that revenue, and that helps pay back some of that initial investment. This is something that Liberals like to talk about when it comes to childcare right now, but actually ridiculed us when we would make these same arguments for many years before the Liberals got with the program. The same is true when it comes to a national pharmacare plan. That's a way that government can spend money to reduce the cost of medicine that people need in order to be well. There's been a number of studies that have shown that if Canada had a national approach and the federal government was providing leadership on this, working with the provinces, we could be spending less money overall than we currently spend on prescription drugs. So it's not just about more spending or less spending. It's about what you're spending on and what you're getting for the money that you are spending. So, you know, part of what I think happened and where there is some government action that is partly responsible for increased pressure in the housing market is all of the permission that they gave to the banks and liquidity that they gave to the banks in order to be able to do a lot of lending. Now, our claim at the time was that if banks were going to be afforded that kind of flexibility, it was because Canadians might have to miss mortgage payments, and that banks needed to use that room if they were going to be given it to make sure that Canadians had relief on what they pay for their homes. But that's not really how it was used. We heard from a lot of Canadians that were trying to get mortgage relief from their banks and weren't getting it. And so where did that money go? Well, some of it seems to have been used for investment in the housing market, and that drove up prices. But the fact of the matter when it comes to housing too is that housing inflation has been a very real thing well before the pandemic in Canada and well before the government was running deficits even. I mean, you go back 20 years and you were seeing serious housing inflation in Canada that's just continued and continued. It's accelerated a bit in the last 2 years, but there's been an aggressive trend line on housing inflation in Canada for as long as I've been an adult and paying attention to the housing market. And that's because it's not just public money that's backstopping investment in housing. There's a lot of private money because the corporate tax rate has been cut from 28% down to 15% over the last 20 years. And the Parliamentary Budget Officer released a report just a week or two ago that showed, or maybe it was back in December, pardon me, that showed that now 1% of Canadians own 25% of the wealth in the country. So those folks are looking for where they can spend their money and grow their money. They've got more money than they know what to do with. And part of that is driving inflation in the housing market as they look to real estate as a way to grow their already massive fortunes.
Mr. Sorbara, I want to ask you too about the vaccine mandate for truck drivers that's been, chatted about as well quite a bit. Obviously, the Conservatives' argument is they, support vaccination. Mr. Poilievre said at his press conference today, but that they don't want to, implement a measure like a vaccine mandate for truck drivers because it would put even more pressure on the supply chain. Is there any truth to that argument? And why is your government pursuing, the path that they are with moving forward with a vaccine mandate for truck drivers?
No, why? That's an excellent question. Obviously, quite pertinent because we are seeing increases in food prices, and we have been seeing that because of the supply chain constraints, and it's something important. And we don't want to add to that. What I can say is, I've spoken to one of the largest trucking companies here in the GTA, and he's been quoted in the press, and his comments were very direct. Over 95% of his truckers, and they have 3,000 trailers. About 1,300 employees located here in the Greater Toronto area and the Midwest in Chicago. And to him, it was the right thing to do. And I went on did a segment on TV on this, and my comments were very simple. These truckers are husbands, they're wives, they have family, they have friends, and they go home to them. And you know what? Public health and listening to public health guidance, we need to encourage Canadians to get vaccinated. That's how we're going to get out of this pandemic, and that's what we need to do. And it's been proven to be successful. And with that, for me, there was no debate. The other thing is that the U.S. will be bringing in its own vaccine mandate for truckers on January 22nd. So in fact, we were about a week ahead in doing ours. The runway we provided for the trucking industry was since November, so there's a lot of lead time. Obviously, we don't want disruptions to our supply chain, and we'll be closely monitoring the situation. But from my point of view, this is a public health question. It's keeping your family safe. It's keeping our loved ones safe. And we all know getting your vaccine is the best way to avoid the hospital, avoid over capacity in our hospitals, which we've seen. And that's what we need to go work with. That's the way I look at this issue. I know my honorable colleagues and friends and on the Conservative side, I've seen Melissa Lantsman and chatted with her, and their view is slightly different. nonetheless, I'm respectful of their view and what others are saying as well.
And Jamie, you heard the arguments there from Francesco Sorbara. I guess speak a little bit about your party's position on it, but then furthermore, in terms of, the vaccination rate for truck drivers, the majority of truck drivers are vaccinated, and in fact, it is a very small fraction of truck drivers who aren't vaccinated. So, what kind of a difference will it make if, if this vaccine mandate does come, into effect? Because of how small the portion of it is, will we really see, big changes to the supply chain?
Well, first of all, I think the Liberals are taking a very dangerous approach to this, especially when we are dealing with a truck driver shortage to begin with prior to the pandemic. This is just going to exacerbate it. We are seeing empty shelves in stores of all kinds, whether it be grocery stores, hardware stores, etc., because truckers are in demand. Now, taking perfectly healthy people out of the workforce during a labor shortage, during a pandemic, I think is the wrong approach. These are individuals who, by and large, drive alone, eat alone, sleep alone, do their work alone. The fact that you would, as a government, say we are going to mandate you to get a vaccine or you're losing your job is absolutely short-sighted. I think this is something maybe we could deal with later on, but right now I think this was the wrong move. I think this is just going to exacerbate the supply shortage, and Canadians, I'm sure, when they go to the grocery store and things are missing, and a lot of things are missing, prices go up, they're going to demand answers. But again, this will be another government-made problem because of poor decisions.
So then, Jamie, I'll follow up with you on that, because obviously, as you just mentioned, and it's been mentioned numerous times that, you and your party don't support measures like this. I asked Mr. Poilievre at his press conference today as it relates to the vaccine mandate for truckers, in terms of, obviously these truck drivers are handling various products that will be distributed to, various settings, whether it's, stores or restaurants or whatever the case may be. So is there, and obviously some people would, want the products that they're going to be handling to be touched by people that are vaccinated. But so do you have any other measures that, could perhaps persuade people at the same level to get vaccinated, specifically truck drivers, but not necessarily forcing them to do so?
Well, that's the problem. I think if the true goal is to get as many people as possible vaccinated, we need to stop politicizing this issue. I think those that aren't vaccinated at this point, for whatever reason, are kind of digging in right now. And I think more carrot is needed rather than stick. We've basically I'm talking in the province of Ontario. I can't speak for Manitoba. I'm not overly familiar with what they're dealing with, but those who are unvaccinated can't go to the movies. They can't eat at well, they're all closed now, but prior to that, couldn't eat at a restaurant. They were basically isolated already. And so further isolating them by saying you're losing your job, especially in the trucking industry, at a time like this, is in my opinion, and my party's opinion for the most part, the wrong thing to do. If the true goal is to get them as many people vaccinated, which I think we have one of the highest rates in the world, it isn't by politicizing this and calling them names or demonizing them or pitting them against their neighbors and their friends and their family members. That's not the way to do it. And until I think that switches, those who are unvaccinated are going to stay that way because they're just sick and tired of being demonized.
Okay, Mr. Blakie, I guess just kind of your general reaction to the vaccine mandate for truckers. How do you think it will impact the supply chain, as the Conservatives have brought up, and do you think it is worth it from a public health perspective to do so, as it relates to kind of the I guess liabilities from an economic perspective?
Yeah, well, I think you've heard the two sides of the argument pretty well here, and it is a public health issue. And I do encourage everyone to get vaccinated. We've seen that vaccine mandates can be an effective tool in getting more people vaccinated. I think it's appropriate to proceed and to be mindful of the effect it may have on supply chains. That's something for government to watch. And if it really does precipitate a crisis, then that may be something that government has to respond to. But I think it's worth moving in that direction and keeping a close eye on it. And appreciate hearing my conservative colleague acknowledged that, supply chain issues do also have something to do with inflation. And it's not just a question of government spending. And as I said, I mean, it depends on the spending. There's lots of spending that this government engages in, and ways in which they engage in that spending that I don't agree with. But it doesn't mean that every type of spending is bad or wrong or inappropriate. And just because some types of government government spending can be an inflation driver doesn't mean that all the things that government might spend money on or do are therefore going to cause inflation.
Okay, and then just to follow up with you too, Mr. Blakie, to what extent do you think specifically, though, the vaccine mandate for truckers is something to, be concerned about from, again, just the kind of economic perspective in terms of the supply chain issue with pulling it kind of basically, making it harder because there'll be fewer truckers on the road?
Well, that may well be the case. As I say, I think that's something that has to be monitored, but I don't think it's a reason not to proceed with a vaccine mandate. We're seeing the mandate enforced in the rail industry and across federal industries, many of which are strategically important, many of which are facing challenges that we're seeing across the economy right now in terms of recruiting and retaining qualified workers. So that's something that we're all contending with. And it's something to keep an eye on, but I don't think it's a reason at this point to say that we're going to single out the trucking industry as one where we don't need people to be vaccinated.
And Mr. Sorbara, I gave both Jaime and Daniel a follow-up, and just obviously they've been criticizing some moves that your government have made. So just quickly, and last word to you, what's just your general reaction to what they've both said?
I think getting Canadians vaccinating is priority number one. With regards to the trucking industry, there was a long runway lead time for that industry to be vaccinated, and we encourage them to be vaccinated. Obviously, we need to always monitor what's going on with our supply chain, whether it's the trucking industry, the shipping industry, the rail industry, our airports, and COVID has disrupted a lot of those industries. It froze our economy overnight. We've had some openings, and then we've had to dial it back, which we've recently seen here in the province of Ontario. Let's hope that we're now on the way back up in terms of reopening, and that's what I'm understanding reading tonight, which would be a good sign. And at the end of the day, we started this conversation, Wyatt, on the inflation front, and we know Canadians are paying more for some basic goods and services, and my family is, and I know Jaime and Daniel do shopping as well for their families, and we understand that, and we are here to assist Canadians, and we've done that. We'll continue to do that. Affordability and helping out Canadians is job number one for our government. Whether it's $10 daycare, the Canada Child Benefit, raising the basic personal exemption amount, increasing benefits for seniors. We were there for them, during the pandemic, and we're going to continue to be there for Canadian workers and businesses as we exit the pandemic recovery. And we have to remember, we've actually recovered more jobs than we lost pre-pandemic. Which is a great thing for Canadians, because that's a job is a future, and we need to ensure that continues where we go on that path and continue on that path.
All right. Well, Francesco Sorbara, Jaime Schmale, and Daniel Blakie, thank you so much for joining me, and it's been great chatting with you all.
Likewise. Thanks very much.